Staff Rep Police Chief Hart.
Here.
And I might add, this is probably the last time I'll say this, but we wish you well.
Thank you.
Commission members Beardsley, Fosdick, and Troika. Also City Planner Arbach, Engineering Consultant Boss, sorry. And the city attorney is trying to get the signal up so he can.
He's actually on the screen.
Okay. And that is Deputy Clerk Ritchie. One of the things is this meeting is live streamed on Facebook for those who didn't know. So anyone who wishes to watch the planning commissions can do so. And normally our electronics is a little smoother, but we open that up to anyone who wishes. So the first, I'd like to get a motion to approve the agenda as distributed.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I'll move to approve it as amended. I'm going to strike the one item under discussion, site plan inspections, because we have nothing new to report there. But instead of that, I do have an introduction I would like to make. So noting that modification, I'd move to approve the agenda as amended.
Second. Do we have a vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Second, I'd like to approve the meeting minutes of January 26th as submitted.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Citizen comments. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comments. We will have an addition open meeting at the time of the presentation, but this is the initial one. The person is requested but not required to state their name and address. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person, and the citizen comment period will be limited to 45 minutes. Also, email comments will be accepted and will be read. So a person that is not needed to be here to have their comments put into the record, just for your information. May I have a motion to open the citizen comment period?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, you do not need a motion. They may simply come forward and make comment if they wish.
Seeing no one coming forward, let's go to the first public hearing. We have an application from Jack Garland of Cruel Construction for a final site plan for the new Michigan Sports Academy. It's 12,000 square feet of indoor sports facility with an 8,400 square foot of parking area for 20 new parking spaces. It's located at 1328 Woodlawn Drive in Saline, parcel number 18-12-20-430-015. The application reports have been submitted. There was 2 reports submitted on February 8th and 9th. Mr. Cruel responded on February 8th and 9th, and the response was on February 16th. Our city planner and consultant updated their response, having received Mr. Cruel's memo. All those are in the packet. So with that, let me start out with City Planner Arbach to explain his report.
Thank you. My name is Mike Auerbach with Carlisle Wortman Associates. As mentioned, you have copies of our reviews in the meeting packet. The first review dated February 9th, 2022, and the second February 18th. And as mentioned, the applicant's requesting final site plan approval for a new 12,000 square foot indoor sports training facility at a vacant 3.2 acre parcel located at 1328 Woodland Drive, which is zoned I2 General Industrial. The facility will have a single point of access from Woodland Drive, 20 space parking lot, and an on-site stormwater retention basin. The facility will house Michigan Sports Academy, which provides indoor softball and baseball training. The indoor sports facilities are a special land use in the I-2 district, and according to the review procedure outlined in section 9.04 of the city zoning ordinance, special land use applications are reviewed in tandem with preliminary site plan reviews. The Planning Commission reviewed the preliminary site plan and special land use application on December 8th and recommended approval to City Council subsequent to conditions. On December 20th, the council held a public hearing and granted the special land use permit with conditions that the applicant obtain final site plan approval and that the proposed uses must remain compatible with the uses described in a letter provided by the applicant, stamped as received by the city on December 1st. And so you have our comments on the site plan and the subsequent letter provided by the applicant. I also do have a verbal update in regards to some of the details related to parking that were listed in that December 1st letter that I believe was included in the commission's preliminary site plan review packet. So final site plans are required to improve detailed information about the development of a site to ensure that the proposal meets the city's requirements for parking areas, access, landscaping, building and site arrangement, and that any potential impacts on adjacent properties are minimized. Final site plan approval, which the Planning Commission can grant after review and after holding a public hearing, authorizes the applicant to apply for building permits. And so the standards for final site plan approval are listed in section 805 of the city zoning ordinance. And we go through those requirements in our review letter. In terms of dimensional requirements, building height setbacks, we see no issues. The proposal complies with the applicable requirements in the I-2 district. And regarding natural resources, the site's relatively flat and no woodlands are present. However, as we noted in our preliminary review and this more recent review, there do appear to be some issues with the site in regards to wetlands, floodplains, and soils that we recommended be addressed prior to final site plan approval. So regarding wetlands, both state and federal wetland inventories indicate that the majority of the site is a wetland. However, as we noted in past reviews, these inventories are general in nature and would require a subsequent delineation to confirm whether or not any wetlands are present. The applicant has indicated that they acknowledge the presence of hydric soils, which are a component of a wetland determination, but they assume that if any wetlands are present, they don't meet the state criteria as a regulated wetland. And so we should note that the final site plan, though, does not include the delineation as recommended. While we generally recommend that a delineation be provided so the Planning Commission can assess the potential impacts on wetlands, it is ultimately the applicant's responsibility to verify that and comply with any requirements of the state. So depending on the commission's review, you can either request additional information from the applicant, or if you're comfortable with the information provided, approve the site plan on the condition that the location of any wetlands be verified and the applicant obtain any permits as required by EGLE. The applicant's February 16th letter addresses the concerns we cited regarding the soils and floodplains. The applicants indicated that they've taken soil borings and the project engineer is working to overcome the soil challenges that the predominant soil type of the site may pose. They're identified as Puamo clay loam, which is prone to wet conditions, flooding and frost. They've provided information that that's being accounted for, which we think is acceptable at the final site plan review stage. Similar to the wetlands, they've indicated that, the floodplain, a portion of the site is within a 500-year floodplain. They've indicated that they are raising the elevation of that portion of the building that may overlap with the 500-year floodplain. Again, that's the information that we would recommend they provide at this stage of the review. We see no issues with the building location and overall site arrangement. In our past reviews, we did have some concerns in regards to the proposed parking, especially given the facility size and the potential users it could accommodate. However, the applicant did provide some of the information we requested and recommended that the Planning Commission require for review. In their December 1st letter, there was a mix-up on our end about which letter was being referenced in terms of the one that was stamped as approved. So in that December 1st letter, they do provide a more detailed description of the proposed use of the site, that a maximum of 2 people, a student and an instructor, would be in either the pitching lanes or batting cages at a time, and they provided hours of operation as well. In addition to that, the special land use approval was conditioned on compliance with that letter. So in the event the parking does become an issue, that could be a means that the city could enforce or require additional parking. So in terms of overall access and circulation, we see no issues with what's being proposed. I'm contingent on any additional comments from the city staff or engineer. The applicant did provide a letter of approval from the fire department for the proposed gravel turnaround. In addition to the conditions recommended by the fire department, we recommend a condition that the gravel drive be structurally maintained, as in our experience, gravel drives and parking areas are prone to degradation and potholes over time. So we recommend including that condition. A safety path is proposed, or excuse me, a walkway is proposed connecting the existing sidewalk to the entrance of the site. It was adjusted as discussed at the previous meeting, and we see no issues with the walkway. A landscape plan is provided on sheet L1, which in our review meets the city's requirements for on-site landscaping, green belts, and buffering. We should note, however, that 2 parking lot trees are required. 1 existing tree is being applied towards that requirement, which is acceptable. However, the parking lot pavement appears to encroach into the drip line, so we would point out that in the event that it is damaged, it would need to be replaced after a final inspection by the city. Lighting and signage are identified in the plan. The location of lighting fixtures as well as a photometric plan, we see no issues with what's being proposed, and the proposed signs meet the applicable dimensional requirements. And again, a separate application would be required when it comes to the time for the sign installation. The city has design requirements established in Article 7 that apply to industrial buildings over 1,000 square feet in area. The language in that section doesn't provide a lot of flexibility in the application of those requirements, and they are in the intent section of that article. The standards listed there are established as minimum requirements to be maintained, as the ordinance says. So the applicant has provided, so at the final site plan stage for industrial buildings, in addition to elevations and floor plans, color rendering is a requirement in addition to calculations showing the proportion of facade materials that are selected at each elevation, and there's a table that establishes the maximum coverage that any single material type can cover on a particular side of a building. The final site plan did not include a table showing those calculations for the elevations. In our review, though, we estimate that the ribbed metal siding, which is proposed in varying amounts around the building, may exceed the maximum 25% allowed on the front of the facade. Although again, it would be our preference that that information be provided by the applicant, so we could make a determination. But again, in our estimation, it may exceed that maximum amount. So in closing, prior to final site plan approval, we recommend that there's several concerns, as noted in our review, should be addressed to the Planning Commission's satisfaction. The first of which being that the applicants confirm the location or lack thereof of any wetlands on site and possible development implications of wetlands. Or alternatively, the commission could approve the plan as proposed on the condition that the applicant verify the presence of any wetlands and obtain any permits required by Eagle. The Planning Commission will need to make a determination regarding the proposed facade materials, and as well as address, and should also approve the plan provided that any items identified by the city's engineer are addressed. And finally, we also recommend that any approval be conditioned on the fire department's letter, and with the addition that the gravel drive be structurally maintained. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Dean?
Yeah, just one question regarding the, I believe it's the dumpsters or using bins. Do we have a requirement that we should be using dumpsters at all our facilities? I was kind of surprised that bins were being used at this one.
The enclosures required, I do not recall any requirements for a dumpster versus a bin.
Just because I'm curious to see if it's going to be a problem with our waste management by doing that. So that may be a concern. I'm not sure what our contract is for them in handling it, especially in commercial and industrial areas.
That may be a question for city staff, how facilities can request either dumpster or bin.
Okay, so I think that will be something that we'll have to have clarified at some point. That's it for my question.
Any other questions of Mr. Auerbach? Ms. Bowes, would you like to go over your reports?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I am Sally Boss from OHM Advisors. I know you've seen my name on a lot of letters, so I'm here in person tonight to explain it. Our original letter dated February 8th had 12 comments on it. The applicant's resubmittal on February 16th addressed many of these, so we are down to 5 comments for Planning Commission consideration, and then 4 comments to be addressed during construction plan review. So we did recommend approval based on the review, but contingent on the Planning Commission's consideration of those 5 comments. The first 3 are in regards to the detention pond volume calculations. They do get into total volume, the volume table, and then the outlet structures. Ultimately, it could change the overall size of the pond, which is why I wanted to bring it up in front of Planning Commission so that you would be aware that that pond size may change once we get those details worked out. And then the next 2 also regards to the stormwater management system. One is echoing city planners' comment on the wetlands. We generally do like to see that delineation to know what we're dealing with in terms of Eagle permits. And then downstream stormwater capacity calculations are generally provided for sites to make sure we're not causing any flooding issues or exacerbating any ones that already exist. The applicant did note in their response letter that that should have been calculated in the original development plans for the overall industrial park. However, that industrial park predates my involvement with the city, so I don't have copies of those. So as part of the applicant's due diligence, I do recommend that those calculations are either found and provided or they're redone so that we can make sure we're not causing downstream flooding issues. And then we had 4 minor comments for construction plan review, sanitary sewer. There's a few items we have to work out and confirm with city staff. And then there's 2 ADA compliance issues. One of the ramps cross slope diagonally is not in compliance. And then we did request additional spot elevations for the handicapped parking space to make sure that we are in compliance there. But those are relatively minor and should not affect the overall layout of the site.
Very much. Any questions for Ms. Boss? At this time, we'd like to have the applicant, well, first of all, is there a motion to accept the receipt of the reports?
I'll move to acknowledge receipt.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? For the record, Troika is abstaining?
No, I'm participating in this one. It's later
This one, okay, sorry. So, at this time, I'd like the applicant to step forward and comment on the project.
We have a lot to comment on.
That's good.
I'm Todd Gensheimer, This is Jack Garland from Kroll Construction. I'm the developer. They've been hired to do the general contracting. We appreciate all those comments. I'd like to give you just a brief overview of the history. We've been at this about 6 months now, and we hope tonight can be very near an accomplished night. It's not as complicated as it sounds. If you read the recommendations from OHM and CW, there are 3 to 5 at the bottom of each of their reports. It's a lot of information has been talked about, but I think most of it is resolved. There are 4 or 5 issues we want to directly address because we think you're in a position to approve the plan as submitted with limited or no conditions after we're done talking. But the 6-month history began with Michigan Sports Academy, who has been in business for 20 years in the city of Saline, 13 of those years in the industrial park, being told by their landlord in August that they're not going to renew their lease at the end of 1 year. So they are under a time constraint to find a new home. They would like very much for that to be in the city of Saline. This site is a very logical space for a lot of reasons. It's been vacant for a lot of years. I'm sure the city would like to see it sold. It's less than a quarter mile from their existing location, so it's user-friendly for all their clients. We entered into a purchase agreement with the city to buy that land. I did personally, but that agreement is contingent upon getting through our due diligence and getting your final site plan approval. Once we receive that, we can then close on the land and begin with the project, which we are fully prepared to do. The preliminary site plan and the special land use application that we submitted to you and that you approved was based on a very specific set of circumstances. Some of it mentioned here, a 12,000 square foot building, single story, pre-engineered metal building, to be used as an indoor baseball and softball training facility with 8 workout stations, 5 for hitting, 3 for throwing. Each station will accommodate 2 people, usually 1 instructor or parent and 1 student athlete. And generally they have 10 people in there at a time. It's not something that is occupied by vast numbers of patrons, but at maximum capacity it's 16 users. It's designed for that purpose. And the site plan had 20 parking spaces. You accepted that with the understanding that we would meet the explanations we provided in our letter at that time, and we believe we've done that. The final site plan was submitted for approval, incorporating the comments that were received during the preliminary site plan approval, and I believe that you mentioned those were generally resolved in the final site plan review. The reviewers, as you know, provided extensive comments. Mr. Garland from Kroll Construction responded to all of those comments, and the updated site plan you have before you reflects that. And we're down to a handful of items. And we would argue that that handful of items are things that should be accepted by the Planning Commission without condition, but we'll leave that for your determination. The 4 things that we want to address, and Jack's going to come up and take care of the environmental issues here in a minute, are the wetlands conversation. That has been raised, the facade conversation with the use of materials on the appearance of the building, the parking, whether or not we're providing adequate parking, and the downstream storm sewer calculation. Two of those are deal killers if we can't resolve them here tonight, but I think we can comfortably. Let me address the facade because I think it's fairly easy to address. I left you each a packet tonight in advance on your desk. I'm sorry to have done that, but we got the comments from the final reviewers' letters late, so we didn't have time to get these in. But what you have on the first page of that is the very beautiful building we've designed for Michigan Sports Academy. And it generally meets all of the appearance requirements save one. The one that the reviewer observed, which is the amount of steel rib siding on the north face side of the building. It allows in the appearance standards for you to have some discretion, by the way, as long as the intent of the appearance is met. And we have 43.7% steel rib siding on the face of that building versus the allowable 25. And I will note that the last page of this packet represents those calculations that they were requesting. On the sides of the building, we're allowed up to 70% steel rib siding, but we didn't choose to do that. We chose to take a very thoughtful approach to the overall appearance of the building, and we have only 44.6% steel rib siding on the side. We have a 7-foot 4-inch high block, scored block masonry wall down the sides because it's a vast open area, and you can see the sides from either side. But for the sake of argument that this should be accepted by the commission, I've included the pictures following, which saves you a drive through the neighborhood. The page 2 is the building next to us. All steel rib siding, no windows, no block. Indeed, with respect to that building, there's HVAC on the face of the building between the building and the drive, which is not permissible. The building on the other side of us is the next page. That'd be flat out bread. Again, substantially all steel rib siding, floor to ceiling. Across the street is the next page, which is a little prettier building, no windows, but about 45% block, nearly 55% siding. And then the dilapidated building at 905, the old Cressive Tool and Die building, which is the next building down. The last picture is the Rosedale Products Building, which is the building Michigan Sports Academy is currently in and moving from. So I would put to you that it's a vast improvement and meets the intent of the standards without specifically meeting all of the standards. The one exception be the amount of steel siding on the face of the building, and I would ask you to accept that, given that we've taken greater precautions on the sides. Let's talk about parking briefly, if I may. I thought I had adequately addressed this in the discussion that was raised during the preliminary site plan review, but reviewers have made some additional comments, so I'll just take it on one more time. The facility has a very specific and intended use. There's no baseball fields, there's no softball diamonds. It's not a facility that can accommodate 9 players playing against 9 players in a game-like setting. I think one of the comments that was made to me over the phone when I spoke to Mr. Lewan about the concerns was that experiences they've had with other similar facilities, athletic facilities, and hosting tournaments and having overflow parking flow out into the streets. And I understand that because Huron Valley Volleyball and the sports facility that does basketball next to us can actually practice on a game court. So they can have a training facility but also host events. We don't have that luxury. That's not the design of our facility. Our facility is very limited, very specific, and so we just don't think it's an issue. It's not a YMCA that has vast numbers of patrons trying to get in. We don't have a pool and a gymnasium and a basketball facility to accommodate all those people. Michigan Sports Academy does sell memberships, but I liken it to my wife's car wash membership. It's the best analogy I can come up with. She pays $50 a month to go through the car wash as often as she'd like, but only one car can enter the car wash at a time, and that's much like the situation we have with this facility. We have 8 training facilities, so people who have memberships, and there's a very little number of them, have to sign up for cages based on their availability, batting cages and throwing cages. So it's not an issue at which it might be inferred by the comments in the review that it would default to a chaotic situation. It's just not going to happen. And I will end with the track record for 13 years. I drove by there tonight and stopped before I came. There were 5 cars in the parking lot. It's February, which is the month before high school baseball goes outside. It's the peak season. And they're at their busiest time, and there were 5 cars there this evening at 6:30 or 6:45 when I drove by. In the 13 years they've been there, they generally have 1 to 10 cars in the parking lot. At peak times, they have 16 cars. We have 20 spaces, which is 25% over their peak capacity, and we think it's more than adequate. And we believe you should be comfortable moving forward without any conditions with respect to parking and facade. And now I'll ask Jack to come up and address the comments with respect to wetlands and the downstream storm sewer calculations. Thank you.
Good evening, Jack Garland with Carl Construction. We've been hired to general contract the project. I'd like to address 2 of the issues, wetlands and downstream storm capacity. In regard to wetlands, the state specifically talks about what is permittable or controlled by the state, of which we do not fall with under. We are not in jurisdiction of the Great Lakes, Lake St. Clair, inland lakes, ponds, or streams, and we are under the requirement for 5 square acres. The issue right now is we don't have, there are 2 ways to delineate wetlands. You have to go out and do an actual study of it, of which you can't do until the spring season when stuff's growing. There is also a way to do wetland reconnaissance, which is going out to the site, seeing if there's evidence of wetlands, of which there are no evidence of wetlands on these sites, or this site particularly. The last mapping for wetlands was in 2005. In 2005, there were no wetlands identified within our site. They're on the other side of the railroad tracks. Now, I'm not sure the date of the year, but there's now a Part 303 which applies to that, which identifies soils which could be contiguous to a wetland. We do fall within those soils, but the whole entire industrial park actually falls within those soils. So our contention is, even if we do fall within the wetland, we would not be permissible to file by the state, obviously. Our project is only going into the south corner of the project, the southwest corner of the project. We are not touching the vast majority of the project, which would be potentially where the wetlands would be, even if they were there. So, in regards to downstream storage capacity, as Ms. Foss stated, there are no records for the existing facility, or the whole entire industrial park. We feel, per code, we cannot discharge any more stormwater than an unimproved site. So what we're discharging into your system does not change what that current site is currently. So in turn, it would not change anything that's happening downstream. Without the documentation associated to all of that whole industrial park, it would be a very cumbersome process to go through and verify the downstream capacities, which we don't feel would be an obligation of ours. All right, thank you guys very much.
Mr. Gearbaugh, we called Waste Management, my staff did, when the question was raised on bins. Waste Management said they do bins or dumpsters in the industrial park. It's at the client's election. They also said that this is not under their contract. This is considered an open space under their contract, and so we could hire anyone we chose to do the waste management, though we would use them because they're in the neighborhood, but they do bins.
Actually, I'd like to add that as well. We do have a location on the plans that shield the bins.
Does anyone have any questions of the speakers?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would move to open the public hearing at this time, affording the public an opportunity to comment on the subject if they'd like. So I'd move to open the public hearing at 7:37 p.m.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing is open. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion to close public hearing is passed. Mr. Beerson, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was a little slow on this. I just wanted to confirm that this is not a walk-in facility. That's the point you were making about always knowing that there's going to be a certain number of people in this facility and it's going to be 16 or less today.
That's right. There's going to be 16 users or less. One of the comments the reviewer made was limiting the number of people. We think that should be left to the fire marshal on building capacity. We don't think there should be any limits to the number of people, but users is 16 users.
Thank you.
If you go to the floor plan layout, you'll see there's 8 stations that can be used at one time in the facility.
Mr. Gearbaugh.
I guess these would be questions for our planners. As you mentioned, you said before, the materials part is per ordinance. Would that require a variance or not?
I believe so, yes. Like I mentioned, those requirements are listed in Article 7 of the city zoning ordinance, and the intent of that section seven, or that article, section 701 reads, these standards are established as minimum requirements to be maintained. No use otherwise allowed shall be permitted within any district which is not conform to the following standards of use, occupancy, and operation. Unless there's a provision somewhere that we missed, I don't believe the planning commission's allowed flexibility, so yes, it would require a variance.
Because the other buildings that are referenced were probably built 30, 40 years ago, prior to this probably being adopted.
That, we haven't looked into that.
I do know that we probably changed that when we opened up the Sauk Trail. My other question, in terms of the Eagle and the wetlands and that assessment and all that, are we risking any liability or concerns with that, not having it fully addressed?
I would certainly defer to your attorney on that question. In terms of the zoning ordinance, the site plan review provisions and the city's environmental protection provisions require new developments to have minimal impact on natural features, including wetlands and waterways. The language, though, is somewhat general, and so in terms of meeting the site plan review requirements, the planning commission could approve the plan on the condition that the applicant verify wetland locations and obtain Eagle permits, because primarily that is an Eagle jurisdiction. That's my thought.
Thank you. That's it for me right now.
Can I follow up on Mr. Gearbaugh's question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Forshee, did you hear Mr. Gearbaugh's comments about the wetland issue and the potential for Eagle permits and reviews?
I did,
Okay.
Mayor.
And
Yeah.
I'm sorry, if I may, I mean, my assumption would be language as our consultant just articulated would seem appropriate, that at least it be reviewed and that a determination be confirmed that they either do or do not require additional permits or evaluation from the Department of Energy, Great Lakes, and or Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy.
Yes, Mayor. I think it would be a matter of being a condition of approval, or and no, there wouldn't be any liability as far as the city if they make it a condition of approval. They're still obligated to follow all state laws and environmental laws. So we as the city are not, we're not going to take on their liability for them either doing what they're supposed to or not. We can just do our review in the scope of zoning and make it a condition if we believe it should. And it will be, whether we make it a condition or not, it will be incumbent on them to follow all state environmental laws.
Mr. Appleton?
Yeah, if I may, we don't disagree with the fact that it shouldn't fall on your liability. I believe that's accurate. We also don't think we should apply for something we don't need and delay our process that much further. So we don't think a condition should require an application to Eagle to determine whether or not there's wetlands if we know there are no wetlands, or if we know any wetlands that may exist that we determine later exist are not within their yardstick of controls, and therefore we feel very comfortable moving forward, but we would feel uncomfortable with a condition that required us to do something to delay our project if it didn't impose any liability on the city, and if it doesn't, if it causes us to have to spend time and money we otherwise should not be wasting without our own determination.
Question on that one. Have we ever foregone this type of situation before? Well, you wouldn't necessarily know. Our history is with our other planners.
Generally speaking, a wetland delineation is a common requirement. I believe the condition would simply make it a part of the record that it's the applicant's responsibility to verify any wetlands and obtain permits as required. But yeah.
That's my suggestion as well.
To the city's history, yeah, that would be something I would need to research.
So just to be clear, we are not currently proposing in your recommendations that we require an Eagle application, simply that they verify the presence of wetlands. If they find them, they may have obligations to Eagle, but we're not ourselves deciding that.
That's my understanding, and the city attorney has additional comments.
Yes, I agree with the planner. it can be simply a statement that if so required by Eagle, this approval would be conditioned on them obtaining that. And if they don't, then of course we could revoke. Well, first they would be doing an illegal act by violating state law, but then that would also revoke any approval we would give. So I think a good condition would be that they follow state law, and that's a condition of our approval as well.
We agree. Following state law is a good thing, generally.
Generally and specifically.
I have one follow-up question. One of the things that's been recommended by OHM and referenced by the applicant is the recommendation for downstream storm sewer capacity calculations. I heard the applicant object that would be onerous. I also raised a point, which I believe is correct, that they're already required to not increase the natural flow off the property. So if they abide by that, it wouldn't make a difference what the downstream capacity is because it wouldn't be affected. Have we in the past required these type of calculations when we can't find them from historical records?
I'm not aware of a previous incident where we weren't able to confirm them based on our master file, but Mr. Gearbaugh or Secretary Treasurer have to have been here longer than I have, so.
I'm pretty sure Jeff would have done whatever to confirm that, but he may have done the calculations himself. I don't know, I can't recall.
Yeah.
I mean, there is that concern about stormwater drainage and so forth, that if the conditions in this requires that it can't be any more than what the natural runoff is, then that would have to address whatever coming forward, but I don't know if we want to waive that at this point in time with concerns that we've had with our own stormwater issues in the city.
May I comment?
Sure.
The two things that are really, really relevant, we're required to have zero impact. So we have to self-contain, and all our calculations that we've provided indicate that we will and have. Furthermore, it'd be not only onerous, it's a deal killer. It would take an enormous amount of money and time for the tiny size of this project for me to calculate or to pay someone to calculate the entire industrial park downstream water impact. And it is an absolute unnecessary waste of money.
That's it for questions. Any comment on that issue?
I would just state I agree with the applicant on that point. They're already required not to increase the downstream burden, so I don't see this as a necessary requirement.
Mr. Albrecht, can we find the original or the calculations for the park? Should have been done a long time ago.
We can try. I talked with Tasha, and she didn't have any record of it either, but we can keep digging.
Perhaps the deputy clerk could connect with the city clerk and check our master file as well.
May I make another comment on the subject while we're talking openly? The outcome would make no difference. If we determine you have inadequate downstream coverage, we can't change that. We're going to have a zero impact whether we build or don't build. So whatever we find is really outside of our scope of being able to confront. It really is a city industrial park matter.
I get that from my perspective as mayor. It'd be valuable to confirm that information.
I understand.
Yeah.
We're not asking you to.
Okay, thank you. The panic level was rising.
No, but our staff needs to answer it on a general basis for everyone. First of all, let me ask, with the commission, are there any issues regarding the facade or parking?
I mean, the issue with the facade is going to be, it will require a variance and approval by ZBA, so that could be a deal killer right here. We can't, Planning Commission does not have the authority to make that change, so it either has to be delayed and go through ZBA, or the building needs to comply with the current standards.
Can we approve subject to obtaining a ZBA variance?
Yeah,
Sure.
I think we can do that. But just to be clear on that issue, we can't.
That's correct. I would need to check, some communities have provisions one way or the other, but generally speaking, yes, site plans can be approved with the condition that a variance be obtained.
We've done that before.
Well, it seems that the two issues are then the variant for the facade, which seems to be a procedural issue, but then the second is the wetlands. Do I have a motion on the floor to approve this project condition with or without conditions?
I'll move it with, approved with conditions. Do we need to word slightly different the concern about the downstream sewer capacity? I think that's the one. The other ones I'm fine with. The Eagle thing is going to be their responsibility no matter what because of state law. I think the downstream one, though, might be the comment, and I'd like to have OHM say how we would potentially ignore, not ignore it, but address it.
How to word that?
Or should it just be reflected in the minutes and not in the motion?
I would say the minutes, not the motion, because they are required to comply with less flow than what is currently coming off the site.
So we need to reflect in our minutes that between our consultants and staff, we will check the master file
Yes,
to see what data we have.
yes.
So then, if I may, Mr. Gearbaugh,
Yep.
unless there are additional conditions, the only addendum I see as applicable, really required, would be that approval is contingent upon a variance being granted by our independent zoning board of appeals.
So, Mr. Mayor, I
For the
thought,
facade.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that sounds good, because we're moving it with, approved with conditions, so it's all the conditions that you've already addressed, plus with approval of a variance for the facade. And that way it'll keep it moving forward.
So let me be, and perhaps the attorney or the assistant clerk could assist me. So then the motion that Gearbaugh moves is a motion to approve with conditions the final site plan from Jack Garland of Kroll Construction for a new Michigan Sports Academy 12,000 square foot indoor sports facility building with 84,115 square foot parking, 20 new parking spaces located at 1328 Woodland Drive East, Saline, Michigan 48176, parcel number 18, ending 015. Condition upon variance being granted by the Saline Zoning Board of Appeals. A facade variance
Facade variance.
being granted by the Zoning Board of
Or
Appeals.
is it facade or is it materials?
On the facade, I think the variance from the facade requirements for industrial buildings would be adequate.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we have it clarified.
Do you have that, Katrina? Okay. And Tom, does that sound good, fair to you?
Yes, I believe that's good. Thank you.
Gotta get a second to his motion, Mr. Chair.
Before we, well, any other questions or comments on the motion?
You gotta get a second to the motion. There's no second currently.
Second?
Second.
Second, Chief Hart. Any comment from the applicant?
The only comment I have is there just one condition, and that's that we get the zoning approval?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is that correct? I said with conditions, so I'm not sure we're waiving all the OHM. And if there's any of those conditions that have not met or been clarified, I want to make sure that we're not letting those go. We've never done that in the past.
So in our letter, we did recommend citing the letter from the fire department as a condition, as well as additional condition that the gravel drive be maintained structurally, because the fire department did not address that in their email.
Correct.
And apart from the motion, we'll check our master file for information regarding stormwater capacity infrastructure.
so the OHM report did have additional recommendations. I don't know if we're intentionally not including them. For, the most recent February 17th report says there are some discrepancies. They want the applicant to verify, say, total pond volume. Those are things that would be part of their property, part of their stormwater detention, different from the issue of calculating downstream capacity. Are we intending to include those or not?
That's my motion. The only thing I was making an exception to was addressing the downstream sewer would be all the conditions which they're proposing, so that we don't miss out on what it is.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize for doing this in the middle of a motion, but I need to ask, why did they design the building this way and create this issue? I mean, wouldn't a fix be to change the design of the building and save yourself perhaps a delay?
The design of the building has no impact on the discussion about downstream water. Is that the one?
No, facade.
Cost is the primary reason. We took an overall view of the aesthetics, and we added more block on the sides and less steel than the appearance standards required. We took into consideration the appearance standards, which they break up any surface area on the front. So we added cement piers on the front and an awning and a 12-foot block section with steel ribbed and windows.
Got it.
And so we were balancing the overall sides with the front, some pluses, some minuses. The only place we're not complying is steel rib siding on the front, but we broke it up nicely.
Yeah, got it. And the reason why I did that was because, I don't know how quick we can have a ZBA. We're supposed to have one next week, but I don't know if that's too soon. They seem to be under time pressure because of the tenant losing their space. And it makes me wonder whether or not, because the reason they need to get a variance is their own doing. They designed it to save money, and that's the first failure of a ZBA action. So their ability to get to win that appeal starts off on the wrong foot. I'm not saying it'll fail, I'm just saying it fails at least one of the criteria. And I just wondered whether or not there was a plan B in the design that we could incorporate in some way so that if push came to shove, they would choose a redesign to keep the project moving versus have to wait another month to come back or whatever to this body.
Is it possible to approve our site plan with the condition that we obtain the zoning exception for the appearance facade or meet their accommodations in the alternative?
That's where I was headed.
In other words, we can negotiate with them.
Well, I mean,
Is that possible?
Well, I was sort of suggesting that we have a motion that approves it on a compliant basis or conditioned upon this plan being approved by the zoning board.
yeah, there's really no, a zoning board, and I think Attorney Forshee can back me up on this. A zoning board of appeals is essentially a quasi-judicial body. So they're going to review your application. They're not going to negotiate with you and try to find common ground. That's not their purpose. They're going to say either yay to your variance or no. And at that point, if it's a no, then it goes the route of litigation. I believe it goes to circuit court at that point, if the petitioner is not pleased or feels that it is not the appropriate outcome. Am I correct in all that, Tom?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, exactly. They have certain standards, and they're just going to look at the ask of them and either approve it or not. They could approve it with some conditions, but it's not a negotiation at that point.
Some quick clarification.
But I think if it's the condition is that they achieve a variance. If they were not to achieve a variance, they could simply comply with the ordinance, and then they would still have their approval. I think is that what you're getting at, as far as not having to come back
Right.
Another time?
This would basically allow them a plan amendment at the staff level with that facade only, where the composite is changed to have less of the siding and more of the block. I mean, that's my read on how this will play out in practice.
Gentlemen, if I may, that makes sense, but as Bill as Mr. Beardsley and Mr. Troika know, that will require modification to the amendment that's on the floor.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll have to revise the language, which we can do in a quasi-friendly way, or we can do it as a formal amendment. But that's up to the individual who wants to make the modification.
The motions from Councilman Gearbach, would you?
Yeah, clarify out, I mean, just to clarify that is fine with me.
How would you word that, Tom? I don't mean to put you on the spot. Attorney Forshee.
Sure. I would say, so the condition would be either that's approved with the condition that they achieve a facade variance, and if that is not accomplished, the site plan is approved so long as it meets the
Existing ordinance.
existing language of the ordinance.
That's fine.
It almost goes without saying, except it's good to just to say that, so that, you know, they're not coming back if that happens.
Deputy Clerk Ritchie, did you catch that? Okay.
Are there any final questions, comments?
Got to make sure that Hart also accepts that modified language. Okay.
No.
No, she's just giving me a thumbs up that she got the verbiage down, Mrs. Heft.
Okay, I think we're actually ready. All those in favor of the motion from Councilman Gearbach, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Good luck, ZBA.
Before we go on, I would like to enter in the minutes that the city planner or the city will try to find the stormwater calculations for the entire industrial park.
We can do that.
Okay? And at our next meeting, if you would just give us an estimate of when you think that will be able to happen. I won't ask you to have it by the next meeting, but just an estimate of when you think that will happen.
Sounds good.
Are there any other questions regarding this project? Okay, can we move on to the next unfinished business, which is the zoning amendment, creating ordinance 834, an ordinance to add adult use marijuana establishments to certain zoning districts and define the process for each. And I might add, this is supplemented by ordinance 835, which defines many of the terms. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chair, before deliberation starts, I am not participating and recused on this matter.
Commissioner Troika is excused. And I might add, this was postponed from last meeting. We did discuss this 4 weeks ago.
Mr. Chair, this is Tom Forshee. By the way, I can't see you all, but you can see me. Just wanted to let you know that. So I'm gonna trust that you're not gesturing at me in any way. But, well, I guess we'll see how this goes. But if you'd like me to kind of run down, I provided the Planning Commission with a red line. I hope everybody got it and had an opportunity. There was some questions about co-location that the board asked me to clarify. If you'd like me to do that now, I can do that.
Please do.
Yes, please do.
Okay, thank you. So the question came up last time was, could a provisioning center, which if you recall is the medical side of a retailer that's on the medical side, could it co-locate with a retailer, which is on the adult use recreational side? And At the time, the answer was no, because our ordinance didn't allow for it. And the question was, could we do it if it was allowed by state law? And the answer to that is yes. And so I also had a chance to talk with City Manager O'Toole about co-location. And so in this new draft, you'll see that there is a definition for co-location, and that's where marijuana businesses, so that's either kind, holding 2 or more types of state operating licenses under the adult use or medical facilities can operate within a single building. And the reason she thought that was a good idea, and I agree, is that it makes it so that you can kind of consolidate or make more efficient the number of marijuana facilities that are out there. So you wouldn't, once a medical is established, of course, that puts a buffer around that medical establishment. So then if another recreational, even if it's under the old ordinance, even if it was the same owner, would have to have a separate building, at another location. And it makes sense that it's allowed by state law, and so it makes sense that we would allow having them consolidate. And they have certain state regulations that they have to comply with about keeping the product separate, and there has to be separation between the two. But other than that, from an outward facing, it's kind of more efficient in that it consolidates recreational and medical where it's appropriate. The other term that is included here is equivalent licenses, and that's defined in the Michigan LARA rules. So they define, for example, a marijuana processor under recreational as equivalent to a processor under the medical. They say a retailer is equivalent to a provisioning center. A medical secure transporter, you get the idea. They're kind of they're doing the same thing. One is just in the medical context, one's in the recreational context, but it's the function of what the use is doing is the same. So those are defined, and we allow for retailers and provisioning centers to be co-located. And if you scroll further down, bear with me, we do allow that any combination of marijuana establishments may operate as a separate marijuana establishment at the same location, provided that each use is approved as a special land use. So that's kind of the safety here, that if a place wants to operate with more than one license and do more than one use, they're going to have to come to you, and it's going to be a special land use. And so you can determine if there's some reason why that wouldn't be a good idea from a land use planning perspective. That's where you'd get a chance to go through the standards and talk about why that's not the case. But they could apply for that. And again, it kind of goes back to the consolidation and efficiency type concerns, where you may want to have a combination of certain facility types operating out of the same building. But there are certain, like I said, requirements about separation, and those are all provided for by state law. So that was the major change. I believe that was the only change from last time, was the accommodation of equivalent licenses and co-location. And that was by the way, that was to the regulatory ordinance portion, but the zoning ordinance portion that you're actually making a formal recommendation to the city council, nothing changed there.
Any questions for Attorney Forsythe? have a motion to recommend the city council that we adopt the ordinance 834.
I'll move that.
A second.
Motion has been made and seconded. If there's no questions or comments, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Abstain.
Motion passes 8-0.
With one well, actually, one abstention.
With
8-0.
one, 8-0, with one, 8 and one abstention. Next on the agenda, motion, zoning amendment creating ordinance 836 and ordinance to amend Appendix A zoning, Article 12, sign regulations. And we did receive a packet for the proposed changes. Are there any questions?
Maybe I misunderstand. This packet says 835. Voting on 836?
The next one should be 836.
Oh, there it is. Thank you.
Just for clarification, there is a ordinance 835, but it is actually supporting 834. So those two went together.
I was just curious, Mr. Chairman, for Attorney Corsi, if he had any additional insights or perspectives from when we last reviewed this proposed ordinance about a month back.
Yes, so I did make a couple changes regarding banners that I believe Commissioner Gearbaugh raised. Banners are a prohibited sign. We talked about solar and accounting for solar. So I did include that in the definition of under an electrical type sign so that it's contemplated in the definition section. And then it's also talked about so that it's taken into account if it's not integral to the sign. If it's integral to the sign and you wouldn't know that a solar panel is there anyway, then, you know, it doesn't really matter. If a solar panel is not integral to the sign, then we do count that towards the total area, just to take that into account, the visual. But on a bigger picture scale, we're still in a holding pattern as it pertains to the Supreme Court case that talks about on-premise versus off-premise sign regulations. You might recall from last meeting that there's a case in the Fifth Circuit, which is not our circuit, but it's one of our sister circuits, that the court struck down the distinction between an on-premise and off-premise sign. And that has been appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which would be binding on us in the Sixth Circuit. And oral argument has happened, the briefs are in, but now the court still has not decided. And based on my research, it looks like there's no way to predict with absolute certainty when an opinion will be released, because it depends on if there's dissents, if it's a unanimous decision, if there are justices that concur in parts but not in other parts, and it gets bandied about behind the scenes. But generally, it looks like it's probably going to be the end of June or early July before we get an answer on that. So I think for the moment, unless there's any other changes, we could kind of put it aside, put it on the shelf until then, and see if that changes our strategy on on-premise versus off-premise signs. And in the meantime, if there's any other concerns, you can let me know and we can update, and then we'll see if we need to update it in the summer.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Bill?
I have vague recollection of our discussion about banner signs, and when I read the total prohibition, I just thought we were overreaching because it would have a negative impact on commerce, and I wondered whether there'd be a way to include it back under the temporary provision, and I know it's an enforcement issue, but it just strikes me, we let homeowners have 8 signs in their yard, and we won't let a business have 1 banner sign. It just feels like it's not very business friendly to me.
Yeah, and I think my intent was it's more the freestanding banner signs. It's the vertical banners and then the ones that are just standing out in the middle of a right-of-way or in the property.
Well, what was the previous standard? They had a few days each month or each quarter to install a banner sign?
It was,
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Tom.
so it sounds like there may be consensus on doing a definition of something, so maybe not banner totally, but something like a banner, but that's freestanding, that maybe we could define in the definition section and then regulate it differently than a straight up banner. I mean, that's an option. The question on whether or not that's more of a policy question of whether it's too strict or not strict enough. And of course, by the time it rolls around to voting time, I mean, you know, you could amend whatever is kind of before you, and kind of gain consensus with other board members that way. But you know, I can draft an option regarding if I didn't capture your intent about a total ban on banners, then I'm happy to go back to the drawing board and see if there's some other way to more precisely capture what you had in mind as being, you know, the offensive type of sign versus a total ban.
Yeah, I can't speak for the rest of the commission. I would support that, and I concur with Mr. Beardsley's position. I think limiting use is fine, but an outright prohibition, I think, is excessive, and that's probably something I would not support.
And that was not my intent. It was more the vertical banners and the freestanding ones, because we use a lot of banners on all the businesses and things uptown. And the changes to temporary signs would address banners that are up every other week or every other month. So I think that would help address that part of it.
Okay.
Tom, is there a definition of banner sign in the draft ordinance?
Yes. Yes, there's a definition of banner in the sign I think I sent you 2. One is like a standalone with just the definitions because it's in a totally different section. But yeah, it's in that definition ordinance. But you know, we can define it how we want to, as long as we're not doing anything that's you know, content based. If we can more clearly articulate what a banner is versus a freestanding banner or something like that, we can define them separately and treat them differently. So.
And Tom, I also forget the prior presentation. I remember a little bit of it. Are we under an immediate need to amend our sign ordinance, or can we wait on the Supreme Court?
I think the latest version that we have here, it's a lot of clarification of what was already there. There's just a few tweaks to, you know, content-based type content. But I think, as I said before in the beginning, the intent was not to say, oh, this sign ordinance is unenforceable as is, but you know, we always want to make it as solid as we can. So, you know, I think it can wait. And if we were going to go forward, if we wanted to do it before the Supreme Court came out with their decision, then I would probably go back and put in maybe a little more cautious verbiage about on-premise and off-premise signs. Just because then we would be more, you know, safe as far as what we were doing, no matter the outcome of the Supreme Court case. So if you gave me clear direction, like, no, we want to get this going, then I would probably suggest that I go back and look at those on-premise, off-premise type things. Otherwise, I think we can wait.
Thank you.
Mr. Gerbach, I just wanted to confirm, the freestanding banners that you're talking about are like the flag signs. right?
It's, well, as where it defines on here, it says any sign, a banner is defined as any sign of lightweight fabric or similar material that is attached to a pole or building at one or more edges. I'm not so opposed to the ones that are attached to a building, it's the ones that are like the vertical banners,
So more like a flag.
or the, more like a flag, or the ones that are, you know, that are in between two poles,
Right.
like the AT&T sign, that type of thing.
So, Mr. Forshee, I think that we just really need to define like flag banner, flag sign, rather than just banner.
Yep, sure thing.
Thank you.
Any other comment?
As you mentioned, would it be appropriate then to postpone this
Yeah.
at this time?
I was gonna
And-
make, in fact, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem
I was gonna
Gerard, I
make
was gonna
that.
make a motion to postpone to a date certain of relying on Tom's judgment and insights about Supreme Court and when they would issue a ruling. I'd give us the time and space and move to postpone to our first meeting in July 2022.
I'll second that.
There's a motion on the floor to postpone this issue till July of 2022. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Before we go on, Deputy Clerk, did you get the comment regarding the investigation of the stormwater in Industrial Park? Okay. All right, next item, 22-07, draft budget. Did everyone receive a copy in the packet? Are there any questions? The requested budget is for the total appropriation is $111,000.
Question?
Yes.
Why so much?
Master plan.
So,
Why don't you come to the podium?
Mike Green, he did these before he left, so he did that based on the estimation of how much it'll cost for the master plan. There's 55, and then I think there was 20 or 22 for an increase for the pending layer farm phase 2 and 3 coming in.
Is that figure for the calendar year 2022?
For the fiscal, so it'll be 22, 23.
July 1 to June 30th.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, if I remember right too, that, do we have to do a full-blown master plan this time?
We don't have to, that's up to you guys were gonna discuss that tonight, to decide if you wanted to just review it and say, nope, it's still going in the correct direction, or do a full.
Yeah, and I think we'd almost have to have a recommendation from our planners or someone that would say whether or not it's significant enough that we should do the change, or if it's adequate as it is now.
Well, I think if I'm not mistaken, at our previous meeting, we discussed sort of a hybrid approach where, this is my judgment, so people are free to disagree, but I'm not sure that there are some changes I think that need to be made and adjustments, but looking at the document as a whole, I think it's pretty solid. But I think at a minimum, as a community that strives for excellence in public engagement, we should hold at least one session, public session, where we solicit public input, have a dialogue and discussion about the future of land use in the city of Saline, and then probably concurrent to that, have some sort of survey to solicit feedback from our residents, property owners, and business operators.
So the question would be whether or not 55,000 is still
The appropriate.
required and appropriate for it. I mean, it may be more like 15 or 20.
We can postpone.
We don't have to spend it.
Yeah, you don't have to spend it.
We don't have to spend it, but I'm just saying that in the event that when we start to do budgets, if we have to modify it, this may be a spot that you could take money out of.
When do we need to submit our proposed budget?
Well, I mean, city council is going to begin to deliberate on a budget for fiscal year 2023 at the beginning of April. So considering that we are likely to only have one meeting in March, it'd be my recommendation to approve or to approve with modifications. But to Commissioner Beardsley's point, I think what's proposed is sufficient. We probably will not end up spending all of that, and there's no requirement that we do so.
I'll make that motion. I'll second.
Motion has been moved by Commissioner Forsyth and seconded. Any other questions? All those in favor of the motion to approve the proposed budget?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. As Mayor Morrow suggested, we will likely not have a meeting in 2 weeks, but we definitely will have one in 4 weeks. And at that time, address, we have several issues to address at the second meeting in March.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the first discussion item which I struck, which was site plan inspections, and I removed that and added introduction. I do want to state for the record that on behalf of the city and city council more specifically, we do thank Chief Hart for his years of service, not only as police chief, but as a planning commissioner these past, I think, 4 years and 2 months. And of course, we wish him well as he begins a new chapter of his professional career early next week. He'll still be a Salinian, and hopefully we'll still see him around town. And with that, I would acknowledge that his seat on the Planning Commission, as my colleagues will recall, is actually not technically appointed by the mayor, but is the designee of the city manager. And so I did confer with Ms. O'Toole today. Ms. O'Toole will be recommending on March the 7th that Miley Weberline, who is in the back, who is one of our assistant treasurers and is a really phenomenal public servant, will be taking the chief's spot. So we will be working with Ms. Weberline, effective subsequent to March the 7th, and I think you'll all enjoy working with her. She's very professional, very thorough, and I think will add a good perspective to this group. That's all I got.
Move to adjourn. Second.
Well, we got one more thing on the agenda there, folks. I'm sorry. Did we want to talk a little bit about master plan?
I think we kind of,
I think we,
Or were you good with that? Are we thinking that will be the consensus?
I like the hybrid approach. I think the most important thing is looking at future land use designations on really all the perimeter properties and the interior ones as well. That's the hardest part of that, other than re-narrating some of the paragraphs. But that future land use is what we rely upon, and it probably needs a refresh.
Let's, well, let me do this then. Maybe between the chair, myself, and the staff liaison, we can confer with our consultant at Carlisle Wortman. I believe it was Carlisle Wortman who helped us facilitate that public open house in the past. Yep. I think we did it actually at Liberty School at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. I think in the summer or fall. I think it should probably be done sooner as opposed to later. So maybe we could get a date on the books and present that to you at our next meeting. And then it would be my expectation, Mr. Beardsley and others, that not only do planning commissioners attend that public open house, but help us facilitate and lead a discussion amongst community members, residents, and business owners. That sounds good.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We adjourn at 8:28.
Thank you.
Good job. Went well.